Hey, I don't know if anyone saw Phil's comment in Slack, but um, sounds like he wants to be a part of that conversation. But I feel like we're all on the same page about this stuff. But let me know if I'm. But basically saying we can move on to Brandon's stuff if you want.
All right. Yeah, just catching up with what Phil was saying too. Cool. So let me get Windows reorganized. We're going to talk about stuff first. It's supposed to give me more of a heads up than that, but that's okay. Mine are hopefully quick, and they probably require a maintainer to answer anything, but we shall see. Window organizing time, as always. Get the chat window, because otherwise people start talking when I can't see it, and then I feel left out of the conversation. So, let's see, my mic is on good. The two that I had should be quick. The registry versus repository terminology. This is in the HackMD, but I'll throw it here in the chat message too, just so everybody has it. Is basically looking at a few spots in the inside of all of this that we say registry, where I think we actually mean repository. And so, does everybody else hear me good on the volume? Sajay just chimed in there, said that he had me low.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. All right. So the few places that we're saying repository, places like when we're looking at blobs, pulling blobs, and it's given a 404 response not found. It's not that that blob doesn't exist within the entire registry. It can just be that the repository itself doesn't have it locally mounted. And so if you didn't do that cross repository blob mount, then you wouldn't see it and you get the 404. And so there are a few spots like that. And so I was just clarifying, and hopefully I got all the right ones there where they should be. And if I missed any, or if I screwed that up, please let me know. But otherwise, I'm thinking this would improve. Thoughts, concerns? Otherwise, this is just a small PR I threw out there and figured I'll just make sure people are aware of it and what was going on.
This looks good to me for whatever, power is vested in me, which is none. But thumbs up.
Kind of like me too. The one place I didn't spend too much effort cleaning up was the error messages. I'm not sure if that breaks anything if we start changing some of these messages or not, or descriptions on the codes. But there are a few spots like the blob unknown is a blob unknown. Really, it's to the repository, not to the registry, but I'm not too picky on that. So yeah, some of those things out there, unknown to the registry. Yeah, I think a few of these could also be changed. I didn't want to tackle that one just yet, but if people say that, hey, we should tackle both these at once, I can do that too. Whatever you folks think. Last call for comments. Otherwise, I'll move forward and we can have a quick meeting. Go on once, go on twice. Everybody happy?
I just gave it a
Cool.
thumb. I was surprised we did not have repository in there. But it
Yeah, it
looks
wasn't
like-
even defined up top. I was depressed. I did my best to try to make a definition for it.
Yeah, name. Yeah,
The reason I
just
use
surprised,
name
but-
is because every example in here, when
Mhm.
you look through it, it's like, okay, here's a name in the namespace of the repository and a tag, and then they draw a line like that. So I was just saying, just to be consistent with everywhere else in this document where they were using that same term everywhere, I would just
Yeah,
reuse that same terminology up top. Because
No, I
otherwise,
think
yeah,
this is
name
great.
makes no sense to anybody.
I just gave it the green. So
Cool. So the other one I had out there, this one might be more contentious or might just need more people from the maintainers to actually chime in on. Was that from over on the working group, we're talking about whether we need to make a change when we push our change up there and we add new APIs. Do those APIs need to be defined under extensions, or do they need to be defined under the spec.md since this is an OCI thing? And I think it's all up to interpretation. And so I wanted to leave it out there for people that had their various opinions, who thought what, and should we be pushing stuff under the extensions path when we make new changes out there, or should it be a spec? And to give you an idea, the extensions is saying we would have a path up there underscore OCI underscore refers, something like that, underscore, slash, all those different things for the path. Or do we just make a new thing like we have commands right now for slash manifest, slash tag list, all the various APIs we have now? Can we just make a new API at that level since we're OCI? That's the only question I had to throw out there. Might be a moot conversation, but go ahead, Josh. I see a final hand up there.
I think the answer. Am I here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think the answer is absolutely yes. In my opinion, that spec changes are allowed. But like as we're doing the working group, it depends on how long this is going to take. I think it seems like we're moving quickly, but I don't know. It's the overhead is more on the clients for having to hit the extensions endpoint. I think for the registry implementation, it's just taking off 3 letters from the path. So I think it's the extensions I view as like a way for us to kind of like test on stuff. But I don't know, maybe it's distracting from getting the change ratified.
Now, to me, I'm just wondering if it's a difference between an OCI change versus a registry specific change. Does that make a difference? Nisha, you got an opinion there?
Not an opinion, just a question on if someone can give a history of where the extensions came from in the first place. Because I'm not sure whether it was there because some folks said, hey, we would like to test new features on a public registry or new features on a registry that we can hit.
The most I can do is look back at the old PR because I'm probably not even as aware. Go ahead, Sajay.
Yeah, I have history because even Vincent's PR has my commits and they just commits from my team on the extensions. So we were trying to get some set of APIs under V2, and the history is that if we modified V2, we wanted to modify it under a path that would not affect any clients. So anything under manifest and anything under tags or those APIs, we didn't want to kind of like touch because it has routing rules on different proxies and whatnot. So the main idea here was that we could create an extensibility option inside the inside distribution. There's also another side conversation about capabilities. I think the camera is flickering. I'm sorry about that. I'll turn it off. So there was also a discussion about capabilities and how to kind of discover what all are the capabilities the registries have. So if you wanted to do things like search, and if you wanted to do things like manifest listing, right? The registry does not have a manifest list API, but you can expose those kind of capabilities. Google has a different tag listing API. ACR has a different tag listing API to show you manifest and whatnot. And all these capabilities could not be put directly on V2 because it would break clients that take dependency on the SDK. That was one of the historic reasons. The primary motivation was that we did not want to go outside of V2 because of auth scopes and things like that. So these two combined together, the thread kind of summarizes a lot of different options and naming schemes and places to put and how to define things like pagination. And we took into consideration things like being able to do references or referrers and attaching. So there is a lot of the working group that motivation that caused this as well. So one barrier or I think one velocity or that we can get out of extensions is that it is marked as an experimental place. It is marked as a place for people to kind of do things and propose things quickly and make the changes happen faster. There should be less deliberation because we agree that extensions will give away for not just any cloud operator, but anybody wanting to experiment under this to offer this. For example, Harbor or other implementations can actually bring in their own extensions of being able to do things like vulnerability scans in formats they have. You can attach different artifacts. Anyway, that is the history roughly about extensions. So it's a much more higher velocity experimental ground that we can start shipping things under. But as we called out in the spec, if it's ratified, we can move it to a path under the actual V2 path. But should we cut a new version of the specification would be the question if we modify anything under V2, because that's new routes and new types per se. But extensions, we've kind of agreed that it's going to be a little bit more fragile compared to any other path under V2.
And did we agree in the working group session that the stuff under the working group is an experimental thing or something that we feel should be ratified?
Ratified.
Yeah.
So what registries out there implement the experimental parts?
I think it's still new, so I don't know if any registry technically does it yet.
So I work for a upcoming cloud vendor, and they don't even know that container registries can do this. Just putting it out there.
Right, and maybe I can add that from whatever discussions we've had with the ORAS side, we decided to go with the extensions primarily because modifying the registry APIs was not something that we were comfortable with. And I, as a owner for ACR, did not want to touch any of the V2 parts. So this gives us a way to ship things that who knows if ORAS goes away. I don't want to break all the clients that have kind of like support, right? So that's more like an operator's point of view.
I think
Zot,
where I'm going with this though, just to kind of tie off of that, because you started down a path there. The place I want to look at is differentiating between when we make a change to something like ORAS or ACR versus when we make the change directly within OCI and distribution spec.
Right. And there are other projects like Zot that's actually leveraging, I think, 6 or 7 extensions. I was looking at their PR as well. So it is new from a OCI specification standpoint, but it is not a model that I would say is not usable. It's up to us, from the group, to decide whether we want to go down this path or modify other paths under V2, because this is kind of like a home in some way for other projects to come out, and the working group can be ratified directly into V2 or manifest if we see that's the right place. I'm not saying we should go either way, but just to make sure that references don't break any other implementations. Either we have to decide to cut a new version of spec if we modify any other parts of the OCI, or we quickly add this working group under as an extension, an OCI extension, and then for the next year or two, kind of like see how it goes and modify the spec accordingly. Either way seems
So
fine.
I don't think we need to modify it. I don't think we need to version the spec, but we certainly can. I think the way to get around considering this a breaking change is to say that in version 1.2 of the spec or whatever, 1.6 of the spec, to say that implementations may implement the refers API as described here. And if you implement it, it must do this. But that way, when 1.6 with references comes out, ECR is not non-compliant on that day, or ACR is not non-compliant on that day. They just don't take the option to support the references API. So in that way, it's not a breaking change. Even if we can cut a version if we want to cut a version, that's fine. But it won't be a breaking change even no matter what. It's not like
Right.
it's not
It
like
can be a-
conformance will break for registries that don't do references. They've just chosen not to support references. In the same
Yeah,
way
it
that
can
some
be-
chose not to support deleting and chose not to support tag list or whatever.
Right. It can be a minor version bump, or at least the other thing is if we are getting into the references or the referers conversation, the paths for the references actually attach onto the manifest itself, which is different from the regex parsing or the URI parsing that's there in the registry currently. You look at 2 segments back and then you kind of like fall off that. But if we add multiple segments over, for example, manifest, digest / referers, that is a different parsing logic. And trust me, we did both. And I know the history of this. That's why I'm telling you which way we want to go is something we want to kind of like think about, right? We actually went with the first path when we kind of prototyped ORAS, just to give you history on that. And it was discussed as to, is this the path that we want to take, where we do a double lookup backwards, or should we just stick under the extensions model, which was slightly more similar to what catalog and the other APIs were, because underscore is a kind of a reserved non-repository name, and that's the delimiter. So it was more of a technical background to why that path was chosen. So it could be.
I think that's helpful. I mean, the proposal's URL format is not set in stone either, right? We can talk about all of that. I think the main question of whether the end result of the working group should be a distribution spec change under V2 or an extension. I think it has to be a V2 thing. We can experiment in extensions. We can prototype in extensions, and we should. And we can even, registry implementations can even keep that implementation at the experiment path, at the extension path, forever. But I don't think we are proposing, I don't think the end result of all of this is we provide an extension that people can implement or not, and here is the spec for that extension. Like, why not just make that a new V2 URL that registry operators can implement if they want to? If the problem, it sounds like the real technical problem you're describing is having digest / references or digest / whatever may break URL handling in clients and servers. I think that's a point to bring up in the working group. We can talk about that, and I have no problem with it being V2 / references / digest, whatever. The URL format does not matter to me, but I think we have to come up with a V2 URL path eventually.
Extensions are under V2, by the way, just to clarify. It's not.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. That's me speaking imprecisely, but a non-extension, a quote unquote, I'm making finger quotes, but you can't see a real distribution path instead of an extension. We should play in extensions. We should experiment in extensions, but that shouldn't be the end goal, I don't think.
Yeah. So real quick, one of the reasons, because I can't raise my hand like everybody else. I think one of the comments we put out there on proposal B was that we had the references showing up at the end of this string here, where I changed that order around when I put it over on proposal D, just to move references in place of wherever you would have manifest or tag list and something like that, to make that parsing similar between all the other API calls out there. Go ahead, Nisha.
Yeah, so now I'm confused because Brandon, you had shown that a version bump is not something a registry can handle unless the registry was modified to, unless the code is modified to check whether there is a V2 or something like that.
This depends on what version we're talking about. And so if we're talking about the media type string itself inside of one of these things, that's going to be a problem. If we're talking about distribution spec cutting in their new release and then validating different registries out there comply or don't comply with it, that's okay, I think.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
Well, yeah, no worries, because it brings up another thought that I had, which was, does it make sense that we can just say, hey, a registry can be compliant with the 1.1 of distribution spec and not compliant with 1.2 of the distribution spec where we add this new feature out there. And then users out there can say, hey, I've got this new code. I want to get the latest and greatest registry. Let me get somebody that's got version 1.2 compliance. It doesn't mean that the registry isn't compliant. They're just compliant with an older version.
I would say whichever gets consensus faster, let's do that. I don't care. I'm totally for let's get this thing done.
Yeah, we need to get it done. Just to recognize that media types are, supposed to be supported by the registries, no matter what media type you pass. So they can't, the registries aren't supposed to be locking down on one particular media type. Okay.
But they do parse the manifest media type, and they use that to figure out how to parse the manifest.
The spec actually supports arbitrary media types. The recommended.
Yeah, that's my point, Sanjay. Yeah, it's
must.
Yeah, if it's one they understand, then they may do some work with it. Yes, but they're supposed to be tolerant.
But if I pass a V2 index right now, does a registry that doesn't know how to parse a V2 index, is it responsible for not GCing all the manifests that are listed under there? Assuming I put in a different place for however that gets sorted.
If I can add, technically speaking, there was a joke that we should even support XML manifests because the spec only says that the manifest can be put. How the manifest is parsed and handled is actually not there in the distribution spec itself. The must is, and it's like ECR that can reject fields that it doesn't understand, even though it's part of the OCI specification. So I think registries have the flexibility to ignore or reject parts that it doesn't understand, but the spec itself doesn't stop you from putting any arbitrary media type in there.
That's right. The goal at the time was to make sure that at least these media types are supported.
I realize it's probably really small. I realize, sorry to cut you off there, Mike. I realize it's really small, but if I test directly against distribution and bump the version on the manifest type, it comes back with a manifest invalid.
Okay.
It's an implementation.
That's our reference implementation.
Yeah, and it's likely because they didn't have that type, right, added to it. So you're adding something that registry doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, when registries look for how to parse a manifest, they just go through like a select statement in there, and they look to see all the different media types they understand. And if it doesn't know how to parse that manifest, then it doesn't know how to parse the objects the manifest references, and it can't validate anything at that point.
Yep. So simple matter of code, we could put it in there and say, parse it as V2 if it's V3 or above. But this probably should have been unknown, not invalid. But
yeah.
Yeah. Smock.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll wait.
You want to go back?
Okay. So the reason I am pulling at this thread is because I'm still unable to understand why there is so much hesitancy to bump versions, whether it's on the registry API or whether it's on a manifest. Because after all, this is a specification. So if bumping versions is not going to make existing implementations non-conformant, it's just going to make them outdated if they don't implement, V2 or V3 or V4. So
I think I can. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm done putting my point out there. This is a thing that's been at the back of my head throughout this whole talking point. I'm still not able to understand where that.
Yeah, don't worry, Nisha. We should be able to bump versions. We're not version adverse.
Okay.
I think there's a practical concern with that. Clients take a long time to roll out. Registries take a long time to roll out. And if you say, schema version 3 or media type v3, things like that, it takes Quay 2 years to roll out basically anything, and it takes GCR months to roll out anything. I can't speak for anybody else, but there's a practical, like, you don't want to just proliferate versions. There's also like version compatibility between things. Can I push a V2 thing to a V3 path? Like, I don't know. I would like to avoid bumping.
So
Yeah, good point.
I understand that proposal E allows for that. So you can, for example, use a V2 manifest and push it to a V3 endpoint. And if you wanted to push it to a V2 endpoint, there's a failure mode that, or there's a notification that the registry can send out, basically saying, actually you should push it to the V3 endpoint, not the V2 endpoint. Or we do not support.
I mean, yeah, then clients have to understand what that means. They have to like signal that to users. They have to either fail with a useful error message or fall back and do that themselves. Like, and clients will take a long time to do it, and clients may never do it if there's no reason, if there's no business reason to hire, pay an engineer to do this work, then they'll never do it.
I think we'd all agree, though, Jason, wouldn't you, that this is a significant enough change that we're probably going to want to rev a version. Right?
Well, okay. When we say version, there's like,
right?
Yeah, there's like 5 different versions we could rev, right? Like I don't think we want to change the schema version or the media type version. I think we should cut a new version of the spec and say this is distribution 1.2 now with refers. But on the day that 1.2 is cut with refers, that every registry that in existence that we know of is already compliant, or they're already conformant to it, because
I see
they don't have to see
with respect to the media type for the image. Yes, right. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
If at all possible, we should use a different spec revision for that particular extension point.
Yeah, possible. I mean, I think this always comes up when we talk about bumping versions. It's not conceptually impossible to bump a version. It's practically difficult and needs to be motivated by a big thing. And
right.
Distribution spec versions
would you
are
like
easy.
to add refers to one of any of the millions of existing images? The answer is probably yes. Right. So. Yeah.
Anyway, Nisha, does that answer your question? I don't know if that was helpful or not. No. But
well, so it is helpful as far as like practicality is concerned, but the reason why we created the working group in the first place was because we found we have a business need for it. And maybe, the next step is to actually go ahead and cut the release and wait until, we get feedback from implementers saying, okay, you have this new stuff. It's got all of these, it says it has all these features. How do we access those features?
By cut
Yeah,
the
I'm not-
release,
I'm not-
the release of the distribution spec. I'm not familiar with what the work group's recommendation is yet. Is that published?
Yeah, I think that's what she means. I'm not worried at all about bumping distribution spec. Like having a new version of the distribution spec. I'm not worried about that at all, because we can make that backwards compatible. And when 1.2 comes out, everything is automatically conformant with it, so nobody has to do anything. I do worry about bumping media type versions or bumping schema versions, because that is a small diff in the spec, but a massive churn of work for clients and registries and users with almost no benefit. And I don't even think we're talking about that. I don't even think we're definitely like proposing that. We're just saying, we'll make some changes to the distribution spec, we'll cut a release. Congratulations, everyone is distribution spec 1.2 conformant on the day it's released. Carry on, you know.
Go forth and tool up, right?
Yeah, you may at any point now decide to implement that refers API described in version 1.2. At any point, roll out support for it, make a blog post, you're done. But you don't have to do anything. You never have to do anything to remain conformant with the spec.
So just to be certain, Jason, if a client wanted to implement the referrer spec in the distribution, if they wanted to implement that, what would be stopping clients from saying, okay, we check for schemas 2 and schemas 3?
Because registries, Docker Hub today will never respond with a schema version 3. Like,
I see. Okay.
there is no way to get Docker Hub today to respond with schema version 3, as far as I know.
Okay.
But if it was schema version 2, but if you go hit the /refers API or whatever endpoint we end up describing, and it 404s, then you know they don't support this version, do the fallback in proposal E and do it that way. And if it does respond, here are your references for this thing, then you can do that way.
Okay, well, that makes sense to me, because there would be clients that actually would implement it. And
yeah,
Docker would say like, okay, I guess this is something people like, so we'll implement it.
Yeah, they can even get signal from all the 404s they're serving on references endpoints. They can say, wow, hundreds of millions of requests for references, which we don't support. We should probably support it.
Okay.
That's a nice benefit.
Yeah.
So right now, when we do the unmarshal of the manifest, we're going out there and saying, let's get the mappings of these media types. And those have been registered individually against specific strings. And so they've got whatever that media type is there, which is this one specific string is mapped to this one function to unmarshal it. When you bump that version, you're really saying that version 3 is incompatible with version 2 at that point. You can't use the version 2 unmarshal or to unmarshal a version 3 manifest. At least that would be my interpretation of a version bump there. So how should a registry handle that version bump when it sees it?
Without forgetting the vulnerability issue that came where we actually made media type mandatory, that broke all the marshalling and disambiguation between OCI types. So the marshal part alone, the line that you're showing here was not is probably one portion of how we could disambiguate manifests. But there's more to it than just looking at the media type, is what we had to go through when we had made the media type as a should. Because OCI by default would, so this is how you discover the media type. But if the media type was not there, there was another discovery mechanism also, right? So all I'm trying to say is that whether we bump the manifest media type or not, there's going to be work to make sure that we parse references of a particular form, even if it's in the same media type. That doesn't make sense. I mean, this distribution is one implementation, but I just think there's more to it than just falling off on the media type itself, depending on the fields that do exist.
Does Zot do the same thing?
This was a vulnerability in the OCI specification itself of requiring media types, because they could push an index and you could sign the index, but then you could pull it down as an image if you wanted to. So it could change types
Yeah.
depending on the registry. So the media type itself was made mandatory as a part of the specification bump. And registries before didn't even look at the media type to sometimes determine what the type was. This method.
I mean, in general, just generally, like, evaluating dictionaries is not safe. So I'm wondering if we are focusing on the fact that, if we are like very much focused on implementation rather than what improvements we're trying to make. So, I mean,
no, I think Jason's point is there are a lot of clients with the string hard-coded, and they have parsing logic that kind of like forms, okay, these are the blobs, these are the layers. If we change that schema, then there's a lot of forking code that needs to kind of like create a yet another manifest workflow. That seems to be the challenge that I'm hearing from the hesitancy of bumping the image spec version. Distribution version, I don't think there's any concern in bumping up because it doesn't affect any of the persisted data. This one changes out the persisted data format and workflows that clients have, is what I'm hearing. Does that make sense, Nisha?
no, it makes sense to me. It's just it's just a crazy reason in my head anyway. Again, I guess I haven't been in this community for very long to be able to say that, okay, this is, I mean, that's a reasonable thing to say or not. I come from a completely different, I guess, coding environment. So these things, like, they blow my mind.
appreciate the insight, right? Like, this is what the community is about. It's about getting input from people who haven't seen these and kind of like bringing everybody along. So you don't have to apologize about background. I think that's actually a welcome statement. So
Just kind of back up some of the earlier comments here.
Oh, sorry.
There are a lot of things that are doing like this case statement over, each of the different manifest media types. They just kind of run a little case statement over them. So I've seen a bunch of these. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, I want to clarify something Sajay said. I'm not worried about bumping the image spec version, but by like bumping, image spec version 1.1 or 1.2 or 1.3. This is not the schema version in the image spec manifest, and this is not the media type OCI.manifest plus v2 whatever. But
Correct.
Cutting a new version of the image spec is, I think, a goal of the working group to say, to include documentation. You can include references, and if you do include references, they should look like this. They must look like this, and this is what they mean.
Yeah, cutting a new version of distribution spec at this level, that's something we should be doing all the time. And image spec too.
Yeah. And yeah. I got to run a little early, but this has been super helpful. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, Jason.
See ya.
So can I try and summarize what we've maybe agreed upon? It seems that we're totally fine cutting a new version of distribution spec with the referrals, and we will slowly include the other changes as and when clients adopt the new version, the new referral spec.
I think that's a good direction. We'd see the proposal and analyze it in deep detail.
Okay, so I guess we have a direction now. anyone disagree?
Sorry, I was on mute there. So I just wanted to clarify, since I was looking up some of the media type stuff earlier and might have missed some of the points being made. When we come to looking at this, we're saying it doesn't need to go as an extension. We just want to put it directly within the reference API. Is that the decision that was made, or am I missing the point there?
I think that was what it is. Cutting a new version, like adding a new path, API path in spec.md is fine. It's not going to affect anyone because anyone who is operating a registry right now is still OCI conformant. And they are open to adopt the new changes if they want to or not. They can inform their clients that this is how you use the new changes. If they want to or not, it's up to them.
Yeah, part of the value of the whole extensions API was that registries that wanted to put their own paths could put their own paths somewhere that OCI wouldn't later step on them and break them in the future. And so they knew that if they put their stuff under ACR or OZ, whatever the path is they're building their functionality, they're safe within that namespace to do whatever they want to do and know that OCI isn't going to come up later on and just dump a path right on top of them.
Well, yeah, it was that, Brandon, and it's also the point that this is going to be a brand new API, and I think we were hoping that brand new things, before they got locked into a must-have in a particular version, they would actually get some exercise out in the field, and we thought that the OCI extensions would be a way for you to do that, right? Start it out, try it, get some registries to use it and apply that endpoint. And then, once it's, gold, if you will, right, or gone through some minor revisions, then you would promote it to an actual spec must-have version.
Yeah, and that's something I've seen.
We're not telling the work group what to do here. I'm just saying,
Yeah, no, and it's something I've seen when I was looking at kind of the comment here of, I know Vincent said it in one of these little sentences, but instead of reading while everybody's listening to what I'm saying, I can't read and speak at the same time. Since I knew that was a point that was made there, is that something that we should be doing in terms of, should we be initially putting all of our stuff right now in the working group under our own little internal path for the working group, and then later on when we submit it to distribution spec, pull that path out and swap the APIs?
If that's the proposal, that you need like one or two new APIs, then it could go into an extension point. But if you needed a modification to one of the existing APIs, then that's different, right?
Okay.
But I understand that we have a choice here. Like either way, it's going to be fine.
Yeah, the one risk that I see is that transition for clients.
Either way would be fine.
I worry about the client transition.
Exactly. if there's risk on the API, not going through major revisions, then you probably want it to just be an extension point as opposed to a.
My fear for the clients is that they start with the extension API and then we change it when we finally submit it, and now we need to update clients and know those new paths and stuff that we worked on in development doesn't work in production kind of stuff.
I think if there's not going to be any change for like 3 to 4 years, then directly proposing it under V2 reference actually makes sense. But if you think that the API is going to rev and you're going to change parameters or change the schema or anything like that, then the extension makes sense to kind of quickly iterate. And then we can say, yeah, we're happy with this for the past 6 months to 1 year or whatever, and then move it over to V2 as a well-qualified name and cut distribution 1.2, 1.3, 2.0, whatever that is. That's the way I've seen this. So
for backward compatibility, will registries still support the old extension?
If they care about their customers, they should. And I think that's a conversation that they should, individual operators should kind of think about. Like if they don't want to break folks, they keep the extension around. or they slowly migrate them. I can give you an example of one discussion that we've had, which is supporting, like, this is not got anything to do with ORAS or ACR, but we had an SDK released, a bunch of APIs that are unique to us, and we had to add a bunch of new fields. It was a breaking change in many ways, and it's a hard conversation, and I'm very scared of deprecation, but if you have to do it, that should be upon how operators want to follow. I think there's an option that we can choose, but if there's no change that we anticipate to the reference API, for example, we don't break the filtering, we don't add more things at a very fast pace, then just putting it under the registry makes like v2/reference makes sense, or v2/name. But that's what I think Mike is kind of asking, if we can get the working group to make a proposal and see where it lands.
Got it.
Works for me. So extensions first, and then cut the spec, cut a new version.
From the working group, I wonder if it makes sense for us to say, here's the path we're going to pick in the future. Here is our intermediate path we're going to develop under. And that way we just know both.
I'm actually thinking of the next working group coming along and saying that, hey, we want to modify the spec. And we kind of like set precedents, say, hey, go through extensions, do this first. It might take you a short time, but by the time the spec is ratified, you can move it under, because that kind of sets a clear fast path for the next one to come along. That's the hope, but we'll see how it goes.
So I guess my next question is, do we have any like framework as to how early adopters can start implementing and playing around with the spec beyond Josh's OCI playground thingy?
This is coming back to the working group conversation, right?
Yeah. I mean, but in general, so we have, it seems like the path to acceptance is experiment with it, show us your, each working group experiments with it and comes up with a standardization of how things get done, make it into a spec change, submit the spec change to wherever you need to submit, and repeat.
Yeah, I'm just trying to follow the question. Is that, are you like just clarifying, or is it like is there any concern with?
I'm trying to clarify, like, so suppose we were to do that, suppose the working group was to say, like, okay, we're going to experiment it with this for a little while. What does that look like? Do developers just come in, start making changes to something, doing demos? What does that look like?
I think part of the value of having the playground out there is that we can start capturing a bunch of the different implementations that people have put together of this, whether it's a fork or whether the upstream project just implements it directly. And then people can play against those and then submit their own.
Okay, so it's open to whomever wants to come into the working group session and demo their implementation.
I guess
I would be
so.
ecstatic if someone showed up.
Yeah.
I can maybe talk about distribution. I mean, we want to probably like get Josh is working on Zot. I had a chat with Josh if he needs help kind of implementing on distribution, and if we want to do that, we can put a reference implementation on distribution also. Distribution is the other project, right? So we can look at both, and then whichever works and it shows that multiple scenarios supported, it makes the case for when we bring it to OCI, maintainer saying that, hey, this is what we have. These are the rough sample implementations and it looks good. And that builds confidence in some way. And if registry operators throw it out there, then it's kind of like a much more stronger set of examples to kind of like go by. Like there's precedence in making that directly into the specification.
It would be
Yes.
really
Yeah,
useful
you
for
want
me.
to give.
Go ahead,
Go
Josh.
ahead. No, I was just gonna say, you want to give the spec maintainers like very little room to like not accept the changes. So I think as much that we could demo and say this works and this has been fleshed out across multiple projects and servers and clients, I think the better. I will say though, I think like, you know, if someone's working on Zod and someone's working on distribution, we should align on, the working group should align on whether it's using extensions or like this and that, the upgrade path. So I think it's something we need to talk about on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think having this discussion here, I can submit some PRs later this week just to say here are some of the changes it looks like we're agreeing with. And in addition, I'm thinking through the example implementations, Go container registry, Zot, I can do reg client. If we get distribution, that's awesome. I would love to see a cloud vendor out there. I don't know if we'll get it, but it would be really cool if we did see something like that, just to see something under actual production use case workloads.
I don't
That's
think
where the
that's going
silence
to
comes in.
happen.
Yeah,
That's not going to happen.
I don't think so
anytime
either, but I
soon.
would love to. Yeah, I would love to hear someone
I
that's got some muscle
want
behind
to
it.
officially state my support for the working group because I think that was brought up in a couple of issues. We're spending significant amount of time making sure that this thing happens because in the end, customers want to store different things, right? Like signatures, scans, and all that stuff. So I want to probably like help there as much as possible, but everybody has challenges and priorities, and we need to figure out how we can make this happen. So just to put it on the record, at least my support for the working group is definitely there.
Yeah, and I know it's going to be super hard for us to get any cloud vendor to put their production data over on a test case here with an experimental path. So I understand the difficulties and appreciate any effort there.
I mean, I guess I can't make any promises from the cloud vendor that I work for, but I will say that there is a need to, I mean, all of the requirements that we have listed in the working group are real customer feedback stuff. Like they want to see this. But they're not going to do anything until it's there for them to use. So it's like the usual
chicken and
open
egg.
source thing. It's the usual open source thing. Like somebody needs to start first.
If we get it in distribution, that might get it into Harbor, and that would potentially open up a big, vast array of clients.
Yeah, that's true. So at least from Oracle's side, Oracle has a container registry, which is just I think that's just distribution. But I don't think at this point they care what implementation they use, as long as they can claim it's OCI conformant. Same acronyms notwithstanding.
Yeah. Well, this, if nothing else, it was really useful for me just to see the direction we want to go with this. So I appreciate all the feedback here.
Thanks, everyone, for
Yep.
dealing with all my stupid questions.
If you're asking the questions, someone else is asking the questions. Not a stupid question.
You gotta stop saying that, Nisha. It's a great question.
And yeah, I know I missed this week's working group. I'm going to miss next week's working group, but I'll get some PRs put out there in the meantime and see if we can make some progress asynchronously.
Thanks, Brandon. You're being kind of like the steward for this right now.
Steward or a skewer? I don't know. Either one.
Right.
Brandon, you
Yeah,
and I should talk a little bit about the path on this after the work group gets this ready and it's ready for distribution. I think we've got some KEPs to do in Kubernetes around this, as well as some container runtime changes to the CRI. How do we validate this stuff? Where do you want to check these extension points that are available, and what results can we get out of it and start to make use of it, right, in the patterns?
Yeah, what I'll start with is just in proposal E, I'll just put 2 entries in there. One is the long-term vision of where we hope to see this. And then the short term, I'll put a _ OCI / probably refer, something like that. I want to get away from saying references everywhere, because we probably should define what a reference is in OCI, because that's what is
Right.
used in distribution everywhere else. And it doesn't mean anything of what we're talking about here today. So I'm going to try
Not
to use
yet,
some
not
different-
officially.
Not officially, but everybody uses that term everywhere else to mean that fully qualified description of what an image is. So yeah, we'll work on it. I'm not ready to be president yet, Josh. Sorry. You got to find someone else for that job.
You should be in the cabinet.
I'm close enough to the city that I know that I don't want to be in the cabinet.
Sajay for president.
Vice President Brandon.
Second motion. All in favor?
I get a veto on this, right?
All right, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Kyle.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.